All right, let's take a look at Chapter 4, Hands-On. So what I typically like doing, especially during the hands-on, is try to cover the entire chapter. However, to do that, right, I can't go specifically from one page to the next doing exactly what the hands-on in the book has us do. So what I like to do is I like to condense some things, right? And so this way we can get through the whole chapter and not in a rush, but get through the whole chapter in a nice, easygoing way, and get you what you need before you leave the class tonight. So, and in future nights as well. Now, if you'd like to follow along in the book, I will do my best to point you to what page we're covering and some of the content that's on that page. Okay, it's on page 109. Starts chapter 4, right? The Cascading Style Sheet Basics. However, we are going to start on page 118. 118. That's where we're going to start. So what I'd like you to do is go to Blackboard. I've provided you with a file for tonight. It's at the bottom of Module 4. It's called Chapter 4 Class.zip, used for in-class hands-on. So please go to Blackboard now, go to Module 4, go down to the bottom, download the .zip file, and extract it. That is, explode, expand, extract, whatever you want to call opening that file and getting those files out of a zip format into, right, just a folder called Chapter 4 Class. Once you download and extract the contents of the zip file, you'll be left with a folder called Chapter 4 Class with two files in it. Two files. One's called color.css and the other is called embedded.html. So I'll give you a few moments to get to those files and simply have that folder open. I'll give you the next instructions in a few moments. All right, so now that you have your Chapter 4 class folder open, you have the two files. Right now in this example, we're only going to be working with the embedded file, and we're going to give Notepad one last try before we get rid of Notepad for something better, right? One of the code editors. So please open up embedded.html in Notepad, or if you're using a other device, text edits, please. Now in the text editor, right, in Notepad for me, this text is really small, so one thing I like to do is first word wrap, which is if I make that window smaller, I can see I don't have to scroll left and right. And the other is changing the font size. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to Arial because it's a little bit easier to see. Oops. There we go. It's better. And regular, and we'll do like 18 points, so it's really easy to see. Okay, so that's nice. The other thing I want to do is I want to open up the same file in a browser. So please do that. Now, to make life a little bit easier, at least for me, I'd like to display both of those windows at the same time. So in a Windows environment, down at the bottom on the taskbar, in that open space on the right-hand side, I'm going to shortcut, use my secondary mouse button, and then choose Show Windows Side by Side. And now I get to code in one and view the result in the other. This way I don't have to flip-flop between the screens, right? I can see them both at the same time. Now I think maybe my format is a little large for the text editor, so I'm going to go with something maybe 18 or 16 point. That's a little bit more manageable, I believe. Let me know if it is too small. Let me know. I can make it bigger for you. Okay. All right. Please take a look at the code. Take a moment to scroll up and down in your text editor and look at what's been coded for you, just to give you an idea of what you're seeing in your browser, right? This looks somewhat familiar, I believe. Okay. All right, the first thing we're going to create is an embedded style sheet. So please go to the top of that text editor and look for the head element. You'll notice that there's actually one empty line after the meta element, right, just before the closing head tag. Give me a new line there. And then you know how I like to structure it, so please tab in. And let's create and write our style element. This is the element that's going to hold all of our styles for our embedded style sheet. It is a paired element. So please go ahead and put in the opening and closing style tags. Now, within or in between those style tags, give me a new line. Of course, tab it in. We like that. Makes things a lot easier to read. And now we're going to type in our first rule. It's going to start with a common element. We know it. We love it. It's the body element. So please type in body. Right, that's the body selector. And if we recall, we're going to follow that body selector with a open and close curly brace or French brace, however you'd like to term those. Now, our declaration goes inside of this curly braces. And so I'd like to code first the background color. So we're going to use background dash color to identify the color we want in the background of the body. Now, the property of the declaration is separated by or from the value, right, of that declaration using a colon. Okay? Now, I like to put a space after the colon only for visual purposes, but you don't need a space there, okay? But it's just easier to read the value when you have one. All right, now we got to put in the actual color, and we're going to use a hexadecimal value for the color. The book has us use E6, E6FA, so let's go ahead and do that. But what do we need first before we put in those characters? Thank you, right? The pound sign or hashtag. So let's put in those codes now. So it's E6, E6, FA. Oh, and what do we need after that? Semicolon. Regardless of whether you're going to put in a second property or not, right, or declaration, we need that semicolon because we like to do that. Now, here's something that you don't have to do, but I like doing. It's more of a personal thing for me. Because of what we're going to be doing in the future. So for me, I typically going to have a rule that might have more than one property or declaration. So I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to put that curly brace underneath that selector. For two reasons. One, it'll be really easy for me to add a new one because I simply have to go to the end of the line, press enter, right, tab in and start to type. Second, I know exactly that I finished putting in that curly brace. So I know I'll never forget to put in the closing curly brace because I can see it right below the body element. Okay? Maybe in the future, as you get more comfortable, you'll decide that that's not something that you like to do. But for now, I recommend doing it. This way we can easily read and understand what we're writing in the CSS. Okay, I'd like to add, actually no, I'd like to save this because I want to see what we've done and see if it actually works. So save that file, go over to your browser, and refresh the browser. Did the background color of the page turn a color of purple? Good. If it did, fantastic. If it did not, then we need to look at your code. So we're good? All right, let's rock and roll. Now, I want to add an additional, right, property to the body element or the body rule. So after that semicolon, give me a new line, tab it in past the body. Right? The text editor doesn't really have a very good tabbing environment, but when we get into our code editor, it'll be much better. Right? So we're going to start our typing just past the body. All right, we're going to change the color of the text. So to do that, we use the property called color. We separate it with a colon, of course, and then the value of that color, which, if we want to follow along with the book, is 191970. And let's not forget about that semicolon. So my number lock was not on. There we go. That's much better. And let me get rid of that. There we go. That's better. Perfect. All right, let's save it up and let's see if it works. Did it work? Can you tell? Pretty difficult, right? I can see it up here. It's like a dark purple, right? On my screen, on the actual monitor, right? The LED here, LCD, is pretty difficult to read, okay? Or not read, but the color. I can't distinguish between the black and this darker purple. So what are some of my options that I have to see if I actually did it right? Say again? I could try another browser. What else? What? Turn the brightness on. Oh, we want to. No, something even more simple than that. That's one option. What's even more simple than that? Nope. Thank you. Change it to a different color. Right? Something that you know you'll be able to see. How about red? Okay. So let's change that color from the color that's there to red. Anybody know what that is? Fantastic. So FF is the full spectrum of R for RGB, right? 00 means there's no color, right? No green. Another 00 is no blue. So RGB. Those are the 2, 2, and 2, right? Now, go ahead and save it. Flip-flop to your browser. Refresh. And now if it turns red, you know you coded it right. But the color that we chose, maybe not the best, right? At least for us to see that there's a difference. Okay, so we know the code is right. So let's go back and put in the original because I really don't think red is the appropriate color here. And then save it, flip-flop to the browser, refresh. What's that keyboard shortcut for refresh on a browser? Control F5 or just F5? F5 just refreshes it. Control F5 is a hard refresh. So it actually goes back and gets the whole page as opposed to just what's different. Yeah. All right. Can we move on? All right, let's do it. I'll take that as a yes. Now, I'd like to add a few more styles. So after the closing curly brace, give me 2 lines. And then tab in, so we're under body. All right, we start where body starts. Let's format or style the H1. So that's going to be our selector. Open, close, curly brace. In fact, I'm going to press enter now and put the closing break on the next line right off the bat. I'm also going to change the background color. So, but instead of typing it, I'm going to copy background color from the body selector and paste it. Okay, I thought I copied this. Copy, paste. There we go. That's better. However, I want to change the color. So I'm going to remove the background color that I copied, and now we're going to go with, and it's on page 119, somewhere in the middle of the page or so. H1 has a color of 191970 for the background. And then I'm going to copy the color property from the one above and paste it in and of course change the value of that color. The book has us go with that E6, E6, FA color. So we're like switching between, you know, dark and light purples, it seems. All right, save your file, refresh your browser, and now we have, right, a dark background of the H1. So the H1 has a dark background, and it has a lighter text color. So far, so good? All right. Now, let's continue with our copy paste. I'm going to copy the whole H1 line from beginning to end. All three of those lines I'm going to copy. I'm going to give myself a couple of lines after the curly brace and paste. And now I'm only going to change what's necessary. In this case, I'm going to change the 1 to a 2. And then I'm going to change my color values to, at least I'm going to file the book here, A, E, A, E, D4 for the background color. And for the text color, we got 191970. Go ahead and save that. Flip-flop and refresh. So what's happening is we styled the body as like a general global type of coloring scheme. And then we said, well, we don't want everything like that. So now let's start to pick and choose which elements we'd like to change and style differently. And so that's what we do with our styles. You've just created an embedded style sheet. Nice job, everybody. Nice job. All right, any questions? Okay, well, we know that it's sad to see Notepad go or TextEdit go, and that's what we're going to do now. So we are done with Notepad forevermore in this class. You are exactly. Right? Yeah, we'll send it a wreath, right? That's perfect. We'll have a ceremony after class. Thank goodness, right? All right, so I'm closing Notepad. Now, if you're on a Windows machine, that's great because you're going to have Notepad++ already installed, okay? So open up Notepad++. Down here at the bottom in a Windows machine that we provide you, on the taskbar, there's a Notepad++ icon, and it should look something like this. Now, if you're using something other than a Windows machine, or you don't have Notepad++, okay, one, you can get to a Windows machine and give it a go, right, that we provide you. Two, continue to use your TextEdit, right, as a text editor. Or three, if you can do it in time as I'm discussing Notepad++ a little bit, you may install or choose to install one of the other code editors and use it for tonight. If not, then stick with what you got and install it right after class. So this way, the next time we come to class, you'll have whatever editor you feel most comfortable using. Okay? I recommend downloading a few and seeing which one you like best. Okay? All right. Now, for Notepad++, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to put them side by side. So now I can code on one side and view on the other. Okay? Now, Notepad++ has a lot of really cool features. For one, which is difficult to see, is that, you see the code, it's color-coded, but what I like, because I don't have that great of eyes anymore, up at the top on the toolbar, there are a series of buttons. Toward the right-hand side, there's going to be a button, or I'm sorry, toward the middle, there's going to be a couple of buttons. A magnifying glass with a plus sign and a magnifying glass with a minus sign. I'm going to click the plus sign, and that essentially makes my text larger. Okay? It zooms in, which is really nice. I like that. Okay? Again, if you're using some other tool, I may not be familiar with that tool you're using, but it may have something similar on the toolbar. The other thing that I like, and you may want to find in the tool you're using, is the word wrap, if it isn't automatically set. It is not automatically set in Notepad++. So up at the top of the screen toward the right, you're going to see like a backwards P, like the old carriage return, as they used to call them, right? Click on that, and now, oops, sorry, wrong one. It's the one next to the carriage return, my bad. That's going to show all the hidden characters. The one next to the backwards P, that is going to wrap the context, right? The content, excuse me. And so those are two things you may want to consider doing right away with whatever tool you decide to use. Wrap the text and then zoom it in if it makes it easier. Now, some of the really nice advantages of a code editor is that they typically give you line numbers. Notice the left-hand side, you have a series of line numbers. So now when you go to the validator, and the validator says, sorry, you got an error on line 13, well, now you know which is line 13, right? Now, what was the tip that I provided you last week about finding errors in your code via the validator? Thank you. So the validator gives you an error, and it says that the error is on line 16. So what we typically do is we look at line 15, 16, and 17. That's typically where the error might be, right? So we look at those three lines and to see if everything's copacetic within those three lines. All right, the other thing that a code editor typically provides you is color coding. Yes, right? So now we can see the difference between an HTML element and an HTML attribute, as well as the value of that attribute. So we have blue, red, and purple. And then black is typically content, right? Typically content. So what does it mean when something that you think should be blue is not? Absolutely, right? So this essentially is like a validator for you. Although it's not validating, it's telling you and helping you. So if you don't see the colors that you should, know that there might be a problem. Okay? Great. And those are really just a couple basic things that we can do to get us started. You can, dive in later on with all of the different toolbar buttons and menu options to see what this thing can do. It can do a lot. Okay? We're going to try to stick with the basics at this point. All right. So we now get to see our code a little bit nicer. It's color-coded, right? Line numbers. Oh, and here's one last thing. I'm sorry. One last thing. Notice on the left-hand side, you see these little boxes with minus signs in them. Okay? This is really useful, especially when you have either a very long page with a lot of code or you're done working on a specific area or part of your page. Watch this. Let's say I'm done working on styles. Notice that there's a minus sign on line 6 next to this opening style element or tag. Click on it, and now the styles are closed. Less information on the screen to confuse me, right? It's still there. It's simply collapsed. That I like a lot. So now if I know I'm done, right, and I don't want to work on this other stuff or accidentally, right, click in that space and make some changes, I can start to collapse the areas that I'm no longer working on, which provides me a very small work window, which is perfect, right? I don't want to get confused by anything else. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and expand everything. This way we can see everything that we have. All right, let's move on. What we did was we worked on an embedded CSS page 118 and 119. We're going to move on to page 120 and 121 to something called an external style sheet. Okay? Now, we already have the embedded .html file open in Notepad++. And if you don't have it open, please open it now. I want you to open up the CSS file, the color.css file. And you can do that a whole bunch of different ways, right? I'm just going to go to the button on the toolbar, click on that little open button, find my color.css file, and open it. Yes, it's empty. on purpose. We're going to fill it with some CSS. Okay? All right. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our embedded file now. We're going to go back to our embedded.html. And I want you to highlight lines 7 through 17. 7 through 17. And we're going to cut that stuff out. And if you want to use your keyboard shortcut, it's Control X. Or if you're on a Mac, it's, I think, Command X. Is that correct, Mac users? Good. So we are going to cut out all of the styles that we created in our HTML file. Now, go to your color.css file and paste it. Control V, or on a Mac, it's whatever that was, and then V. What's that button? I keep forgetting that button. Command. That's it. Command. V. Okay. What's really nice about this CSS file now in the code editor is that it's color-coded. See, before in your HTML file, it wasn't, because why? Why wasn't the CSS color-coded in the HTML file? Why wasn't the CSS color-coded in the HTML file? You can, but in this tool, right, it's CSS. It's not HTML. So the tool itself is saying, oh, well, since this is CSS, I'm not going to color-code it because I don't understand it. Because I'm working with an HTML file, not a CSS file. When we go to our CSS file, now it understands CSS, and it color codes the CSS. Right. So it just depends on the tool. In Notepad++, that's how it works. Right. So now in CSS, our CSS file in Notepad++, body is a darker blue. We got a lighter purple for our properties, and then we got black for our values. Okay. Notice we have line numbers. We have these little minus signs to collapse our rule. Okay. As well as we have some really nice tabbing. So let's fix the tabbing because we copied and pasted it. I'm going to remove the tabs that I placed. Right? And now it's going to look a whole lot nicer. Look at that. Way better. Now, looks pretty much, right, like it did in the editor, but a little better because we can use our tabs a little bit more refined. Oops, sorry about that. So now they all kind of match up. And we can actually tab in the body, and it should all match up nice together. Not the body, the value here. So if I want, I can do something like this if I really want to. So now all of the properties match up if I really wanted to do so. Okay. So tabbing is really nice here in the code editors. Now, before we move on, I'd like you to go back to the embedded.html file, save it, go to your browser, and refresh, just so we know, right, that we're doing something here. We no longer have a styled HTML page because we removed this CSS. We no longer have it. Right? Even though the style element's still there, there's no guts to that style element. There are no rules, so we don't have any styles anymore. So our job now is, one, to save that color.css file. Let's not forget to do that. And then let's link the HTML to the CSS, and we do that in the HTML file. So go back to the embedded.html. Please remove the style element. We no longer need it because we're doing a external CSS. Excuse me. Now, to link our HTML to our CSS, we're going to use the link element. And it is a non-paired. It's just one tag. So let's put in link. Now there's a little bit more to it, of course. So inside the link, and if you'd like to follow along, it's on page 121 in the middle of the page, and it's in blue. It says link, and then REL equals, and it moves on. So let's go ahead and put that in there. So we use the link element. We use the REL attribute, which essentially is letting us know that it's related. The relationship between the link and that file is a style sheet. Essentially, we're just saying, hey, this is a style sheet. And then the href, which is a hyperlink to the style sheet itself. Okay. All right. Save that. Go to your browser, refresh, and did all the styles come back? And that's all you have to do for an external style sheet is develop the .css and link it from the HTML. So whatever you put inside the CSS file will be applied, if coded correctly, to your HTML file. Any questions? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to check the link element and make sure it looks something like what you see on the screen here. So it should have a link space REL equals quote style sheet, not sheets, style sheet, end quote, and then href equals quote color.css, end quote. Are the two files in the same folder? Sorry. So is the folder called Chapter 4 class, are both files in the same folder? They are. Okay. So let's take a quick look. All right, let's move on. Is that okay with everybody? Everybody's got there, was working. Fantastic. What we just covered is on page 120 and 121, external CSS. Now, let's talk a little bit about extending our options with CSS and selectors on page 122 and 123. So we're going to look at creating a class, an ID, okay, and then a descendant selector. So we'll try doing all three of those if we have some time, okay, which I think we do. All right, first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to create a class in the CSS. So please display your color.css file. Okay. On page 123, toward the top of the page, you'll see under number 1 that we're going to be creating a class called feature. So I have line number 12. I'm going to give myself a new line. Let's start the class with a period. You always start a class with a period. That designates a class in the CSS file. And let's call it features. Features. No, feature. No S. Okay? All right. The syntax is the same as the others. So the syntax is the same as the others. So curly brace, and now we decide what we want to style, what we want to be inside of this rule. And we're simply going to change the color of the text. So color, and then we're going to make it red, I guess. Oops. Okay. All right, so save this. And now go to your HTML file. And so to make the feature class actually work, in the HTML is we have to make it associated with something. So we're going to associate that class with one or more of these bullets. Okay? So pick one of the bullets that you like, and go to the first opening tag of the LI that you decided to choose. Okay? Now, put your cursor between the I and the wicket there, right? The greater than symbol, and give me a space. Here is where we're going to use an attribute that's going to associate the class we created in the CSS with this particular element, and it's called class. So just type the word class. So to use a class we created in the CSS, which is denoted by a period, we use the word class inside the HTML. So since it is an attribute, you must use the equal sign and the quotes. And then what is the name of our class? Feature. The dot's only in the CSS. So all we need here is the word feature. All right, save that. You'll notice that there are other color, right, combinations. So now we have the red class because it's an attribute, and then the purple value, right? So now I just want to make sure I have it spelled the same, right? So I don't want to misspell because then it's not going to work. Great. So now let's save the HTML, go to your browser, and refresh. You should now have a red bulleted item. Did that work for everyone? Good. If it didn't, let's take a look at your code. Now, because I'd like to reuse features, that's why I decided to use it as a class and not an ID. So let's apply that class to another bullet, one or more. So I'm going to copy what I just did for usability studies, and I'm going to paste it inside of the search engine optimization opening LI tag. Because I want 2 bullets in red. So save it, flip-flop to your browser, and refresh, and now you should see 2 bullets. Again, we're creating a class because we'd like to reuse a style or rule that we've created, because I don't want to set all of the bullets in red. I only want a couple of them in red. So I cannot style the LI, because if I do, what happens? Yeah. LI, it's going to say all LIs globally on the page are going to be red. No, I don't want that. I only want specific ones that I choose. That's why we use a class, right? Because I want to choose multiple of those bullets to be red. So I don't want all the bullets. I only want a couple, but more than one. That's why I'm using class. Sound good? All right. Let's keep on going. So that was number 1 on page 2, or 1, 2, 3. Number 2 on page 1, 2, 3, we're going to create an ID. So let's please go to our color.css file, give me a couple of lines, and what is the symbol we use for an ID? Yeah, # or hashtag. It's the same thing. And we're going to call this one new. All right. We still use the curly brace. And now we're going to copy, or we're going to make a color in the change in the text color. So I'm just going to copy the one from above and paste it in the one I'm creating and simply change the value. And the value of that one, excuse me. The value of that one is going to be, let's see, all red, no green, and some blue. So I'm going to save that. So FF00CC. I need to go to my HTML file because it can't work unless I make some sort of connection between that ID and the HTML. All right. We're going to put this. Let's see, where are we going to put this new? Yeah, it looks like in the paragraph. So let's go to that paragraph, the first one, inside the paragraph, And let's use our ID attribute. And let's put in the name new. Save it. Flip-flop to the browser. Refresh. And now we have this pink color. So by using ID, we're essentially saying, right, we're categorizing this particular selector that we created to not be reused at all on this page again. We can only use it one time. That's the purpose of an ID. Okay? So now it allows us to categorize the styles that we create, right, the properties that we add in there. Those that can be reused and those that cannot be reused on one page. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Let's do this. I'd like to do, it's not in the book, that is, there's not an example of it in the book, but I would like to do an example. On page 122 at the bottom, it discusses descendant selectors. And so I'd like to do an example of one, okay? Because I think it'd be kind of cool to just see how that works, right? I think it'd be cool for you to see how that works. So let's try to set this thing up. The example has, we're going to be styling only the P tag inside the main element. Let's look at our HTML first of all to make sure that we can actually accomplish this particular example. So how many paragraphs do we have on our page? 2, right? Now, where are those 2 paragraphs? They are inside of what? What element? Main, right? Okay, so if we were to do this particular example as stated with the code we have, well, there are no other paragraphs outside of main. So the example wouldn't really make sense, okay? So we're going to code a little bit just to make the example that we have here make sense. Sound good? All right, we're just going to do a little copy-paste. I want you to take one of the paragraphs. I'm just going to choose the one at the bottom one on line 30. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to, I'm sorry. Oh, look at that, it does. So let's close that in there, thanks. Thank you. All right, so we're going to take line 30. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it, okay, inside the footer. And then, of course, I'll adjust it as appropriate or as necessary. There we go. So now I have paragraphs, right, in the main and in the footer. The main and in the footer. So, now, let's go to the color. Let's go to the color file. Underneath the new, right, underneath our ID, we're going to code in the paragraph. So let's put in a P. And let's style that in some way, shape, or form. I'll let you choose the text color of the paragraph. So we're going to do color, and then you pick whatever color you'd like that you might know. If you're not sure, turn to the back of the book. In a couple pages in from the back, you have 216 web-safe colors to pick from. Pick one of those. I'm going to pick green because it's fairly easy to code. So, no red, all green, no blue, with a pound sign in front of it. So I'll give you a moment to do so. The easiest ones are red, green, and blue. FF0000 for red, 00FF00 for green, 0000FF for blue. Our 3 primary, right? Those RGB colors. All right, so now that you've picked one, what this rule says is that every paragraph right, in that page should look that color, in this case green, okay? Unless we have another style that's overriding it, another rule that overrides it. So let's go ahead and save that, okay? So we're saying all the P's. Essentially, it's global, right? Go to your browser, refresh, right? And let me, let's see, we have a paragraph there. I thought I had 2 paragraphs. Did I cut it out of there? I still have it in there, don't I? Oh, did I not save it? I'm sorry. So I thought I saved it here. I saved it there. Refresh. All right, what I'm looking for is my second. Oh, here we go. Oh, good. Wow, that color is really terrible to see. Let me pick another color because I couldn't even see it. Let's go with blue. I think that might be a little bit easier for us to see because I don't want to make it red because that's similar to one of the other rules. So we'll go with FF. There we go. So that's a little bit easier to see. And I didn't really want to make it like a link, but it doesn't have an underline, so I think we're okay. So now what we're seeing is we're seeing all the paragraphs in the HTML page blue, except for which one? Exactly, because there's another rule that's overriding, right? The global P rule. But what I want is to style only the paragraphs inside the main element, right? Not the one that's in the paragraph, only those that exist in the main element. So to do that, we create what's called a descendant selector. Go to the CSS file, and before the paragraph, type in the element, the selector, right, that contains all of the paragraphs you want to style. So now this rule says only style the P's inside the main. Don't style any P's outside of main. Now, if this works as it should, when I refresh my browser, which one of those paragraphs is not going to be blue? The bottom one. That's right, because it's in the footer and it's not in the main. Boom. Right? So now we have the original, right, color of the body, right, which is some purple color, as opposed to blue that we said it should be. Right? Does that make sense? That's a descendant selector. We have a lot of power with this type of selector. We can be very specific on what we want to style using this technique. Any questions? Okay, let's keep on going. Page 124, 125, we take a look at the span element, right? The span element. So let's add a few more styles here. After main, right, the little sample that we created, let's style the nav. So let's throw in the nav selector. And on page 124 at the bottom, you're going to see the code that we need for the nav. Background color only. And it looks like they want it to be E2, E2, EF. So now if we go to our browser, refresh, the background of the nav now should be this like gray color. You'll probably be able to see it on your screen, but up on the Proxima here, the projector, you can't really see it very well. Okay. So maybe I'm going to change it. Maybe I'll change it to like a gray color, so CC, CC, CC. This way maybe it's a little bit easier to see. There you go. Now you can see that. So far, so good? Okay, let's keep on going. After your nav, give me a couple of lines or a couple more lines. Here we're going to create a class, another class. So it's going to be called company name. And we're going to be styling the company name with a text color. So color, and that color is going to be 6A, 6A, A7. Now, remind me, what do we have to do to make this class actually active, to make it work? What do we have to do? Apply it to the element, absolutely. So let's go to our HTML file. And what we're going to do is the whole purpose of page 124, 125 is to use the span element. So we created a style so we can use the span, right, and that style. We're going to style the company name. So go to the paragraph, the first paragraph, where it looks pink at this point. And I want you to wrap the company name, Trillium Media Design, with a span element. So an opening span before the word Trillium and a closing span tag after the word design. So spans are in line, right? It allows us to style content without giving us a brand new line. Now, go to the opening span tag, and what attribute do we have to add now? Class. We created a class in the CSS, and so now we have to use the class attribute to apply it. And we call this one, I think, company name. And you do not use the period, right? The period's only for the CSS file. And the hashtag is only for the CSS file. Okay, let's go ahead and save it. Flip-flop to your browser, refresh, and now the only thing that should have changed is the company name without giving us a new line. So it actually styled it essentially in line without using inline styling technique. Right? We're using the span to do this. All right? So far, so good? How's the pace, by the way? Going too fast, too slow, or is the porch just right? All right, perfect. All right. All right, next thing I want to try, let's see. I'd like to change something we have yet to discuss in detail, but I'd like to change what's called the margin. Okay, the margin. So do you see the space between the heading, H1, and the navigation? See that empty space in between there? I'd like to get rid of some of that space, or the space between the navigation and the H2, right? So I want to get rid of some of that space. In this case, it's margin that we're going to get rid of, okay? So let's go to our CSS, and we're going to get rid of the bottom margin of H1. So find your H1, give me a new line after the color, and now let's type in margin dash, because we're not going to get rid of all the margin, only the margin on the bottom. And the value for that margin is 0. No pound sign, no nothing, no unit of measurement, because it's 0. Okay? So when you have a value of 0, you do not include a unit of measurement. All right, let's save it. Go to your browser, refresh, and look at that. No more space between H1 and the nav. That looks a little bit more modern now, a little better than it did before. So far, so good? All right, that was actually on page 125, about the middle of the page, part number 2. Okay. All right, let's continue on. And I believe that at this point, I'm going to have you do a activity at this point. So, any questions with what we've covered so far? We looked at embedded and we looked at external. style sheets. We basically covered how to add a background color and how to change the text color. And then in this last little example, we threw in a margin. We'll cover margins and padding and other things similar called the box model later on in this